The night before the wedding should have been filled with butterflies of excitement, laughter echoing in her head, and dreams of a perfect tomorrow. Instead, Emily sat frozen on the edge of her bed, her wedding gown hanging just a few feet away, shimmering softly in the lamplight like a mocking reminder of a future that had just been torn apart. Her heart pounded wildly against her ribs as her trembling hands clutched her phone, staring at the images that had just been sent to her. They weren't blurry, they weren't mistaken identities, they were painfully, brutally clear. There was Daniel, the man she had spent the last 4 years loving with every piece of her soul, the man she had defended against her family's doubts, the man she believed would be her forever. His arms were wrapped around Sophie, her cousin. Sophie, who had stood by her side during fittings, who had whispered promises of loyalty, who had smiled at her like a sister. And there they were in the photos, caught in moments that shattered every illusion Emily had carefully built. Sophie's head resting against Daniel's chest, his lips pressed to hers in a kiss that looked far too familiar, far too practiced. Emily scrolled through the string of messages that accompanied the photos, her stomach twisting with each word. "I can't wait until this wedding is over," Daniel had written to Sophie. "We'll figure out a way to tell her, eventually." Sophie's reply was playful, laced with betrayal. "I almost feel bad, but you know she'll be fine. You belong with me." Her entire body went cold. The weight of the betrayal crushed her chest, but strangely, her eyes stayed dry. She expected to cry, to scream, to throw something against the wall. But what came instead was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that wrapped around her like armor. Beneath that silence, though, something stirred. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't despair, it was a fire, sharp and unyielding, that spread through her veins until she could feel it in her fingertips. The world thought Emily was soft, gentle, the kind of woman who forgave easily, who smiled through her pain, who would choose silence over conflict. Maybe that was true once. But tonight, as the clock ticked past midnight and her wedding day officially began, Emily felt something awaken in her that she had never known before. She wasn't going to crumble. She wasn't going to cancel. She wasn't going to give Daniel the satisfaction of believing she was too weak to fight back. No, she was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it would leave scars so deep that neither Daniel nor Sophie would ever forget the day they tried to betray her. Her thoughts raced as she stood and paced the room, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor. Every step was accompanied by memories that stung like cuts. Daniel laughing with her on their first date, Daniel kneeling to tie her shoe when it broke, Daniel whispering, "forever," into her ear after their first fight. Every memory now felt poisoned, replaced with images of him holding Sophie in secret. And Sophie, the cousin who used to braid her hair during sleepovers, the cousin who knew every detail of Emily's childhood fears and dreams, the cousin who had promised she would always protect her. How easy it must have been for Sophie to slip through the cracks of trust, to smile at Emily while sneaking behind her back. Emily stopped pacing and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked pale, her eyes darker than usual, but there was something else there too, something fierce. She reached for her gown, her fingers grazing the fabric. It had been chosen with so much hope, with dreams of walking down the aisle to the man who claimed to love her. Now it would serve another purpose. This gown, this day, this moment, it wouldn't be about a wedding anymore. It would be about justice. Slowly, a plan began to take shape in her mind. She remembered her father's words from years ago, when she had first fallen in love with Daniel. Don't ever let anyone make a fool of you, Emily. If someone shows you who they are, don't just walk away, make sure they never forget the mistake they made." At the time, she had laughed, thinking her father was being too protective. But tonight, those words felt like prophecy. She thought about canceling, about sparing herself the humiliation of standing at the altar with a man who had already betrayed her. But then she pictured Daniel's smug smile, Sophie's self-satisfied smirk. She could almost hear them whispering behind her back, "She'll never know. She's too innocent, too trusting." The thought burned her from the inside out. No, she wouldn't cancel. She would go through with every detail. She would walk down that aisle. She would stand in front of everyone they knew, and then she would flip the script in a way neither of them could ever prepare for. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she reread the messages, each one a dagger but also a weapon. She had the evidence, the truth carved into the digital world. All she needed now was timing. And timing was everything. The night stretched on as Emily sat at her desk, scribbling notes, making calls, ensuring that tomorrow wouldn't just be a wedding, it would be a reckoning. She called her friend Claire, her voice steady but edged with something dangerous. "I need your help," she said. Claire didn't hesitate, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Loyal to the core, she simply replied, "Whatever you need, I'm there." That reassurance steadied Emily even more. She wasn't alone in this. The clock ticked past 3 in the morning before Emily finally allowed herself to lie down. Her body ached, her heart throbbed, but her mind felt sharper than ever. She closed her eyes, picturing the scene that would unfold tomorrow. She could already hear the gasps of the guests, see the color drain from Daniel's face, watch Sophie squirm under the weight of exposure. It wasn't about revenge alone, it was about reclaiming her dignity, her strength, her voice. When dawn finally broke, sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. Emily sat up slowly, her breath calm, her heartbeat steady. Today, the world would gather to witness a wedding. They would come expecting joy, love, and promises. Instead, they would witness a story that would be told for years to come, a bride who refused to be broken, a woman who turned betrayal into power, a day where love's illusion was shattered but dignity stood taller than any altar. She dressed carefully, each movement deliberate. The gown slid over her body like armor, not innocence. The veil framed her face, but behind it her eyes burned with a fire no fabric could hide. She took one last look in the mirror. This wasn't the reflection of a broken woman, it was the reflection of someone reborn. With one final deep breath, Emily whispered to herself, "You thought you could fool me, Daniel. You thought you could betray me, Sophie. But today, I'll show you, and everyone else, who I really am." And with that, she stepped out of the room, ready to walk into the day that would change everything. The church stood tall and glowing beneath the morning sun, its white stone walls gleaming like a monument to purity, tradition, and devotion. Inside, the air was thick with perfume from the bouquets carefully arranged on every pew, and the faint hum of whispered conversations filled the space. Guests had begun to settle, some craning their necks to get a glimpse of the groom waiting at the altar, others gossiping quietly about the extravagance of the decorations. No one suspected that beneath the surface of all that beauty lay a storm that was about to destroy every illusion. Daniel stood at the front in his finely tailored suit, hands folded neatly in front of him. He wore the confident smile of a man who believed he had the world at his feet. To the casual observer, he looked like the perfect groom, tall, handsome, composed. But if one looked closer, they might have noticed the nervous flicker in his eyes, the way his gaze occasionally darted toward the crowd where Sophie sat. She avoided his glance as much as she could, shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her dress a shade of rose that now felt like a cruel mockery of innocence. The organist began to play softly, signaling the start of the ceremony. A hush fell over the congregation, all eyes turning toward the great wooden doors at the back. Slowly, they creaked open, and there stood Emily, framed in sunlight. Her gown shimmered, her veil cascaded down her shoulders, and for a moment, everyone in the room inhaled sharply at the sheer beauty of her entrance. To them, she looked like a bride ready to pledge her forever. Only Emily knew that beneath her calm exterior, her heart beat with something sharper than nerves, it beat with resolve. Each step she took down the aisle was deliberate. The sound of her heels against the polished floor echoed like a drumbeat of war. She could feel the eyes on her, feel the admiration, the envy, the tears of joy from family members who thought they were witnessing a love story fulfilled. What they were really witnessing was the setup to an ending no one had dared to imagine. As Emily reached the altar, Daniel reached out for her hand, expecting her to slip into her role, the dutiful bride ready to pledge her life to him. Instead, Emily's hand lingered in the air just a moment too long before she placed it in his, her touch cool, detached. The priest began to speak, his voice resonant, filling the chamber with the familiar words of blessing and unity. Emily's eyes never left Daniel's, but she was not gazing with love, she was measuring him, memorizing the way his expression shifted from smugness to uncertainty as her silence stretched. When the priest invited them to speak their vows, Emily took a small step forward. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, and then turned, not to Daniel, but to the congregation. Her voice rang clear, sharp, and commanding, slicing through the silence like a blade. Before vows are exchanged, before promises are spoken, I think it is only fair that the truth is known. A murmur swept through the guests. Daniel's brow furrowed, his smile faltering. Sophie's hands clenched into fists in her lap. Emily raised her hand, and the church quieted again. For years, I believed in this man, she continued, her voice trembling not from weakness but from the force of the emotions coursing through her. I believed in his words, his loyalty, his love. I trusted him with everything I had, and I thought today would be the day we sealed that bond before all of you. She paused, her gaze scanning the faces of the guests, lingering briefly on her parents, who sat wide-eyed, their expressions turning from joy to confusion. Daniel tried to interject, forcing a laugh. "Emily, darling, what are you?" "Silence," she said, the single word so cold, so commanding, that it cut him off instantly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out her phone. With a tap, the screen lit up, and in seconds, the projector set up for the reception, meant to display photos of the couple's happiest memories, flickered to life. But instead of childhood snapshots and engagement photos, the screen filled with images of Daniel and Sophie. There they were, arms tangled around each other, lips pressed together in hotel lobbies, hands intertwined in places they thought were hidden from the world. The congregation erupted, shouts of disbelief, cries of outrage, and whispered curses filled the air. Emily held the phone high for all to see. "This is the man I was supposed to marry. This is the man who promised me forever while giving my cousin what belonged to me. These images are not mistakes. These are not rumors. This is betrayal in its clearest form. Daniel's face turned chalk white. He reached for the phone, his voice stammering, "Emily, please, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like." Emily laughed, a bitter, hollow laugh that silenced the room again. "Shall we read the words too? Shall we all hear the messages where you spoke of how much you couldn't wait to be done with this wedding, how you and Sophie would figure out a way to tell me eventually?" She scrolled quickly, and the projector displayed the words in bright, damning text. The crowd gasped again, the betrayal now undeniable. Sophie buried her face in her hands, but the whispers were already circling her like wolves. Daniel stood frozen, his polished image shattered in front of everyone he had hoped to impress. Emily turned back to the guests, her voice rising with each word. "Marriage is meant to be built on honesty, on loyalty, on love. But what happens when the foundation is lies? When the people you trust most choose to stab you in the back? Today, I was supposed to vow to love him until death parted us. But why should I vow myself to a ghost, to a man who already gave his heart to another?" Tears began to fall among the crowd, but none came from Emily. She stood tall, her gown glowing like armor beneath the light streaming from the windows. "I will not be pitied. I will not be humiliated. This," she gestured at the screen, at Daniel, at Sophie, "this is not the end of me. It is the beginning of my freedom. The vows I make today are to myself. To honor my worth. To never again allow myself to be diminished by lies." A wave of applause erupted, unexpected and raw. Guests rose from their seats, some clapping, some shouting words of encouragement, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief at the audacity of Daniel's betrayal. Daniel himself looked as though the ground had been ripped from beneath him, his face twisted with shame, rage, and desperation all at once. The priest stood silent, unable to regain control of the ceremony. Emily, however, no longer cared. She had taken control of the moment, reshaping it into something no one would ever forget. Daniel reached out one last time, his voice breaking. "Emily, please, we can fix this." She stepped back, her veil shimmering as she shook her head. "No, Daniel, you broke it beyond repair. Today, I give myself the only gift worth giving, the truth." The room thundered with applause again, drowning out whatever pleas Daniel might have had left. Sophie slipped from her seat, her face pale, trying to escape the burning stares of those around her. Emily stood, regal and untouchable, a bride no longer bound to the lie she had been sold. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. And in that silence, Emily's revenge was complete. She had not screamed, she had not begged, she had revealed. And in revealing, she had destroyed the false kingdom Daniel thought he ruled. As the guests began to murmur again, the truth settling over them like a storm cloud, Emily prepared for her next step. The ceremony was over, but her story had just begun.